Then, yeah, as it was already written in the chat, first, a happy new year to everybody, and welcome to the first IGS seminar of 2025. And yeah, today we have several small talks, which are hosted by Liss Marie Andreassen and her colleagues. And they are about Vanishing Glaciers and the 2025 International Year of Glacier Preservation, which I think will be a great start into this year's season. And welcome to the speakers.
So do you see my screen okay now?
Not yet.
Don't see it. So sorry. Was online. Just a minute. It worked when we tested it.
Okay, now it's working.
Thank you. So thanks for giving us the chance to give a presentation on the Annals volume of Vanishing Glaciers and the 2025 International Year of Glacier Preservation. So we will be 5 speakers today, and I will start. And on the next slide, I will show you the content of this talk. So I will start giving you background information about the 2025 International Year of Glacier Preservation. I will also introduce this Annals of Glaciology collection on vanishing glaciers. Thereafter, Dominic will talk about the global glacier casualty list. Daphne Lurie will talk about the examples of vanishing and threatening glaciers on Iceland. Bruce Rapp will talk about the GLIMS list of extinct glaciers. And finally, we end up with Hester Giscott, the chief editor of Annals and Journal of Glaciology, talking about good advice for writing an Annals paper and papers in general. So first, we are now in 2025, it's January. It's the International Year of Glacier Preservation. In December 2022, the UN United Nations declared 2025 to be the International Year of Glacier Preservation. This was proposed by the Republic of Tajikistan and is supported by over 150 United Nations member states. So 2025, this year, is the International Year of Glacier Preservation, and from this year on, 21st of March will be the World Day of Glacier. And the UN has asked World Meteorological Organization and UNESCO to organize it. And along with that, there are many international organizations, such as the International Association of Cryospheric Sciences that I lead, and several others that are helping organizing it. And we have an advisory board where I'm also a member. Next Tuesday, 21st of January, will be the launch day. And then 21st March will be the World Day of Glacier. Along with this year, UN has also declared a decade of action for cryospheric sciences. So this starts this year and then for 10 years. And if you want to know more, you can see the UN Glacier homepage for the International Year of Glacier Preservation. IX also have a web page, and World Glacier Monitoring Service has a web page listing several events of interest related to this year. So what does it mean, preservation of glaciers? The key aim here is to raise awareness of the need for urgent climate action to preserve glaciers globally. And the only way to limit vanishing glaciers is to reduce emissions, rapid decarbonization. And as we know, every fraction of a degree matters. So on the photos on this slide, I show some geotextile covering an ice tunnel that is carved into the ice of a small ice patch, 0.1 kilometer in southern Norway, Ufonna. So some geotextiles or snow production can help, but only at a very small scale, such as this very small ice tunnel. So decarbonization, rapid and urgent action is needed. And that's what we want to mark with the International Year of Glacier Preservation. Now to the Annals online collection. As a recognition of this year, the International Glaciological Society has announced an Annals online collection on vanishing glaciers. Predominantly, there will be letters, short papers, 5,000 words, 3 to 5 figures, but it's also possible to write longer letters, longer papers. The topics of the of this Annals online collection can be found for call for papers, but I also listed them here. Is the follow-up the stories of the global glacier casualty list that will be presented in the next talk, other vanishing glaciers that are already extinct or threatened to disappear soon, contribution that synthesize, give perspective on model vanishing glaciers at local, regional, or global scales, regional and global inventories of extinct glaciers, and the consequences of vanishing glaciers for local peoples, ecology, glacier archaeology, and landscapes. And you find the call for papers and more info on the IGS website for this Annals. So you can just search for them and find it. The deadline for submitting paper is 1st June this year. And as soon as papers are accepted, they will be published online with DOE. The associate chief editors is Gudfinna Tolli, Adal Geirsdottir, and myself. And scientific editors is Rafnhildur, who is here, we'll talk later on, Matthias Hus, Lucas Ruiz, Etienne Bertier, and Frank Paul. I think Frank was also present in the audience. Now I just wanted to show you an example of a vanishing glacier in Norway, in my region where I monitor. So this is Breifond, the southernmost glacier in Norway. The map shows the location of it in southern Norway. So it's south of Hofsjökull, Hofsjökull, Newsdalsbreen. And we have now tried to scrutinize the archives to see what we know of Breifond. And this we hope to write up as a paper for this volume. So Breifond, the photo on the left shows Breifond in 1949 that we found from a historical archive. It's just a small glacier on the plateau. You can see the road going up the valley. But Breifond is listed in the previous inventory, the list of glaciers from 1962, and the first inventory of glaciers in southern Norway and all other later inventories. Then, with air photos from 1955, it had an area of 3.2 square kilometers. So it was a real glacier. Now, we visited this August, and it's diminished into several parts. The sequence of orthophotos here and the satellite images show the shrinking and vanishing of this glacier. In 78, orthophoto shows an area of 2.5 square kilometers. In 2003, the first satellite inventory, it had attached in several parts and shrinked furthermore to the inventory from 2019, only 0.26 square kilometers of the largest unit, 3,099. And now when we visited in 2024, it is only 0.2 square kilometers left of this ice. So Breifond was one of the glaciers on the global casualty list, and it had a gravestone, but it's no date on it because it's not vanished yet. But we are now looking into archives of orthophotos, also producing digital terrain models to assess the volume change. So that was the story of one vanishing glacier. Now I will leave to Dominic to continue and talk about the global glacier casualty list. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Liss, and just delighted to be here with you. So the Global Glacier Casualty List is a new initiative, a storytelling and information platform that we've developed in conjunction with the International Year of Glaciers Preservation, and which we launched at an event in Reykjavik in August of last year. Next slide. So the idea behind this project is to create a collaborative project between people working in arts and design, the social sciences, the natural sciences, as well as civil society organizations to help work together to create both awareness and increase political pressure to take the loss of cryosphere more seriously. And we know that there have been a number of movies that have profiled the loss of glaciers in recent years, some of them with quite a high degree of popular impact and awareness. And I always like to give credit to the Swiss, to the Gletscher Initiative, which did, I think, contribute significantly towards the passage of the Swiss climate law and helped translate the public concern with the loss of glaciers and the concerns about loss of heritage into a meaningful form of political action. Next slide. Our own background, I'm an anthropologist by training, a filmmaker, a designer, and together with my colleague Simone Howe and several Icelandic collaborators, we worked together to produce a glacier memorial for Hofsjökull, the first major Icelandic glacier to disappear because of climate change back in 2019. And I think the brilliant words on this plaque from Anders Magnusson, the Icelandic writer and filmmaker himself, went a long way towards creating a kind of emotional resonance for people. And I think one of the things we've learned from our work is that sometimes abstract figures, as important as they are less easy for people to grasp intellectually and to connect with emotionally. And that might be one of the challenges we face around vanishing glaciers, is how to mobilize people emotionally to really care about this issue when there, of course, are so many other matters of concern. We found that this event attracted media attention from all sorts of outlets. We counted 10,000 across the world, everything from the usual suspects of climate coverage like The Guardian through to Popular Mechanics magazine, to Elle magazine, the fashion magazine. So it shows that people can care about these issues. It's just a matter of, I think, how we communicate them in a way that seeks to create empathy. Next slide. And so this is what the casualty list looks like. I will, after I finish speaking, drop the URL into the chat. You see there's a QR code there if you're available to scan it right now. This is what the main page looks like, a spinning globe with 15 different glaciers from around the world that we've developed, again, in conjunction with collaborators, developed stories that both communicate the scientific information related to the vanishing of these glaciers, as well as in some cases, projections for what might come in the future. Our basic time horizon are glaciers that have disappeared within the past 20 years, or that we feel with some degree of scientific certainty are likely to disappear within the next 20 years. Of course, what's meant by a disappeared glacier is a matter of scientific discussion. We know that. We've always deferred to local glaciologists, and it turns out that in different countries in the world, people actually have different yardsticks for what constitutes the moment at which a glacier might be deemed to be extinct. But that's okay from our purposes, because I think that in all of these cases, what we're doing is trying to create a platform for people to tell stories and to convey meaningful information about these glaciers. Next slide. So just to give you a couple of examples of what the profiles or the stories look like, here's one from Dagu in China, one of the most important glaciers from the point of view of tourism in China, also one that is rapidly disappearing. And this story has both information about the local significance of this glacier to ecosystems, to neighboring communities, but it also has quite an interesting discussion of scientific efforts to slow down, to arrest the process of melting, for example, through the geotextile covers that Liss mentioned before. So this is a place where we're actually seeing people talking about the ways in which we can actually help to retard or to slow down this process of melting, while also conveying quite a lot of important local information about the human significance of this glacier's diminishment. Next slide. Here from across the world, we have also the Pico Humboldt Glacier in Venezuela, which has now lost all of its glaciers. It's, according to some, the first country to lose all of its glaciers. I know there are other candidates. I won't make a strong claim there, other than to say in Venezuela, people are talking and thinking about the loss of their glaciers. They had 5 at one point, and there were quite interesting indigenous mythologies about the origins of these glaciers that we've made into part of this story too, so that you understand what we're losing is certainly fresh water, certainly in some cases a boon to the economy, but we're also losing cultural heritage too. And those stories that might disappear as the glaciers disappear is again a way that we can bring the scale of cryospheric loss down to a human level. Now that glaciers are beginning to disappear in human time, which historically they hadn't, now we have a chance now to sort of rescale our storytelling in a way, or the ways we convey information to sort of match that, to try to connect to real time what's happening in human communities as they seek to process the meaning of these losses. Next slide. So this is a set of images from the launch event. And what we did is, again, together with our Icelandic collaborators, including Hofsjökull, who's on the call today, we constructed a graveyard, a set of ice headstones, one for each of the 15 glaciers in the initial launch of the list. They melted very quickly, much more quickly than glacial ice would, as you can imagine. But we had time to have a funeral event for them. We hired an Icelandic funerary choir. We had eulogies that were written for each of these glaciers, derived from the content, so that people gathered. About 100 people were able to gather there on site and to experience this commemorative, this ritual, using one of our oldest and most universal rituals, which is the mortuary ritual, the ritual of the passage of the dead. The living into the dead, and using the power of that ritual to, I think, attract attention to the problem of cryospheric loss. Next slide. That event itself was mediated. It got into the media, everything from a children's newspaper in France through to a popular science website through to the Washington Post, and many public media throughout Europe covered the story of this graveyard. And so if we are creative about how we seek to bring attention to this issue, I think there is a media apparatus and a great number of journalists and citizens who really do care and engage. And we found that we've had a lot of very positive feedback over the years through these projects, that people are quite grateful for these efforts to try to think of new ways to communicate these losses. And so again, this is all in the if you will, the realm of cultural experimentation, trying to experiment with different ways to get the message across. Next slide. So this is my last slide, and this shows the scientific advisory board for the casualty list. I think you'll see many familiar names there. In addition to living or residing online at Rice University, we have partners ranging from the World Glacier Monitoring Service to the Icelandic Glaciological Society to UNESCO, who've been involved in supporting this project. And I just want to emphasize that we want to continue to add more stories in 2025. We already have 5 stories in draft form that we are working towards adding to the casualty list, but of course there are many hundreds of possible others out there. So I hope you'll help us to spread the word. I hope that if there's a glacier that's of great meaning to you, whether scientifically or personally, both are equally valid from our point of view. Culturally, we'd love to hear from you. And you see my email address there. I'll also drop that into the chat in case anyone wants to reach out afterwards to discuss possibilities. But feel free also to reach out to anybody on our board also. We are all happy to hear from you, and just very pleased at the opportunity possibly to collaborate in the future. Thank you. I'll turn it back over to you, Liss.
Many thanks, Dominic, was giving us this overview of the list. And the next one is Rafnhildur, will talk, Hannesdottir from Icelandic Met Office and Icelandic Glaciological Society, that will talk about glaciers in Iceland and their stories. You're welcome.
Thanks, Liss. So I wanted to give you a presentation of the glacier that we had a consensus about nominating to the list. And if you can, next slide, please. So in the last 25 years, we have lost approximately 70 what we classify as small glaciers. that have been lost, and due to efforts made by our retired glaciologist, Oddur Sigurðsson, we have a well-written document where we have all the names of the different glaciers. So this involved communicating with local people all over Iceland, living in close connection to these smaller glaciers in the mountainous areas of North and East Iceland. Next, please. So glaciers in Iceland have retreated very rapidly since 2000, and since the end of the Little Ice Age, we've seen a loss of 2,400 square kilometers, which equals the size of all the glaciers in the Alps in the year 2015. And in the last 25 years, the area loss has been equal to 900 square kilometers. So the area loss per average is 40 square kilometers annually, and the retreat of individual glaciers is tens to hundreds of meters per year. And this record has been broken. We have large chunks of the glacier tongues being broken off, so the termini are sort of deteriorating, and we have seen losses of up to 300 or 400 meters per year in recent years. So the most common question that we receive from journalists that want to interview us about glaciers and climate change is, which glacier will disappear next? Next slide. So here we have a map of all the glaciers in Iceland, not in their correct geographical location, but just to give you a sense of the scale of the different type of glaciers. So the monitoring work is mainly carried out on these larger ice caps, but we had this aim to find out which glacier we should nominate to this list. So a glacier that was definitely decreasing in area on its path to 0 square kilometers, preferably choosing a glacier that was losing its accumulation area, and that entails a narrow vertical range. So next slide. We were looking at candidates in this size class of 1 to 12 square kilometers. So finally, the smaller glaciers in Iceland were receiving more attention. And in these dialogues between people of which glacier we should nominate, there was a tendency to choose a glacier that was fairly well known. So for example, the ice-covered volcano Hofsjökull was mentioned quite often, but our votes went to Hofsjökull, a small ice cap in the southeast, which you can see on the right there. And it's on a fairly straight path, decreasing in area. So next slide. So this is Hofsjökull Eystri. It's a small glacier which rests at an altitude of 960 meters up to 1080. And during the summers, the slopes of this glacier serves as a wildlife refuge for reindeer. The glacier served as a historically prominent landmark for travelers using this as when they were going on a trail between the southeast coast and the east coast in Iceland. And down on the right, you have a map from 1844, which clearly shows that glaciers in this area were far more widespread than they are today. So since the mid-20th century, the elevation of this glacier has also dropped by about 100 meters. So the entire glacier is now below the equilibrium line. Next slide. So this is the profile of the glacier on the website that Dominic just presented. So it's in the list of a critically endangered glacier and projected to disappear in the next few decades. So part of this work will be to try to do some modeling work of these glaciers on the list that then could be presented and have a clear view of when we expect those glaciers to disappear. Next slide. So here we have the evolution of Hofsjökull Eystri since approximately 1890 at different points in time. So today it's just above 2 square kilometers and does not have an accumulation shown really, so it's melting quite rapidly. Next slide. So the Icelanders aim to submit a paper to the special Annals volume where we'll present the story of a threatened glacier, reports on the aerial changes, and upgrade the geodetic mass balance series that has been previously done by Joaquin Bellart and others. We will aim at recreating a little ice age surface for this glacier and some ambitious plans to do radio echo sounding surveys in May and then hopefully submit the paper by June 1st. That's quite ambitious, but we will give it a try. And then possibly adding the story of Hofsjökull to the volume as well, although it has received quite enough attention. But we are still debating on this. I think that was my final slide.
Yes. Thank you so much, Rafnhildur. I can just say that we take all questions after the final talk. So next speaker now is Bruce Rabb from GLIMS, and he will talk about how we can record these extinct glaciers. So screen is yours, Bruce.
Thank you, Liss. So GLIMS now does track vanished glaciers, but just as a bit of background before I launch into that, I will just talk a little bit about what GLIMS and the related RGI are. So GLIMS, which stands for Global Land Ice Measurements from Space, is a multi-temporal database of glacier outlines and other information. Multi-temporal meaning it can store more than one outline per glacier at different times. And we've recently added the feature of adding an attribute to mark a glacier as gone or vanished or extinct if the community has deemed it so. A related glacier inventory is the Randolph Glacier Inventory. It's derived now from GLIMS exclusively. And the latest version of RGI had selected outlines from GLIMS to be as close as possible to the year 2000. There's just one outline per glacier in the RGI, and it's in a simple file format that's suitable for easy use by glacier modelers and other people. And then the GTNG, the Global Terrestrial Network for Glaciers, is a organizational body under the IUGG and IACS that is composed of GLIMS, National Snow and Ice Data Center, NSIDC, and the World Glacier Monitoring Service, WGMS, that just helps us all work together to provide a number of glacier-related products, GLIMS and RGI, but also glacier photograph collection, World Glacier Inventory, and some other things. So next, please. So here's a screenshot from the GLIMS Glacier Viewer map application. It's just showing a dot for every glacier location. As you zoom in, you can see detailed outlines as you get closer in. But this basically shows the distribution of glaciers around the world, except at high latitudes in this screenshot. Next, please. So just a few summary statistics. There are about 380,000 glacier records in GLIMS. The number of glaciers in a particular inventory depends on what you call a glacier and how, whether you have a size threshold, et cetera. About half of the glaciers have more than one outline at this point. And on the left, the graph shows a distribution of outline count number of glaciers that have a certain number of outlines. So the winner is Corapuna ice cap in Peru, has 22 outlines in GLIMS for it. The next one is Kerguelen Island with 16, etc. But about half of them have just one outline at this point. So next, please. So in GLIMS, what do we mean by a vanished glacier or an extinct glacier? Well, it has to either have completely melted away, obviously, or shrunk to the extent that it is no longer considered a glacier by glaciologists. As Dominique mentioned, we're focusing on the last 50 to 100 years caused by recent climate change. So we're not talking about, glacier loss from the last glacier, the last ice age, for example. And then similar to Dominique's project, we rely on the expert judgment of our regional collaborators to decide when a glacier has vanished, rather than make that judgment on our own here. Next, please. So here's that map again, but with the all those dots turned off, and it's just showing a dot for each glacier in GLIMS that is marked as gone or vanished. We currently have 161 glaciers marked as gone, although we know there are surely many more than that. Just as an example, I'm going to zoom in to one that's actually off this map from Ellesmere Island. So go ahead to the next slide, please. And I'm focusing on this one, not because I think that Canada will soon be the 51st state of the US, but because I personally did some mapping of these ice caps, and also the NSIDC director, Mark Suarez, did some field work in that area. So it caught our attention when the areas started shrinking so much. So again, these little ice caps, which I'm not sure if anyone can see my mouse, but in the upper right, they're little smudges of ice caps that actually, if we go on to the next slide, that's exactly where they are. So here they are. In about 2016, and they're just these small, very clean ice caps, or were on Ellesmere Island. If you go to the next slide, that'll superimpose outlines from various years over the map. So, as recently as 1999, that's the fairly large green outline, and I'm kind of looking more at the ice cap on the right. But 1999, as recently as 1999, it was still pretty big, and as big as it was in 1959. But then, as you go into the middle, like 2015 is that yellow one, and then 2016, it's pretty small, and then in 2020, it was just gone. So just like a puddle on the sidewalk drying on, evaporating on a hot sunny day, it accelerated and just disappeared pretty quickly. Next slide, please. So, as I said, GLIMS has marked 161 glaciers as gone so far. We know there are many more. In one of Dominique's last slides, there was I think, Washington Post headline that said thousands of glaciers have disappeared, and I don't know where that came from actually, but it's probably true. And I have a feeling that many of you in the audience right now might have data on glaciers that have disappeared in your regions, and we would love to get those into GLIMS. Basically, we need the GLIMS glacier ID and the estimated date of disappearance, the uncertainty in that date, and then a description of how it's known that it disappeared, whether it's from field work or satellite imagery. And there's a guide at that URL, which I can put in the chat after a bit. So that's the summary of what GLIMS is doing to track extinct glaciers.
So many thanks, Bruce, for doing that, and I just support the encouragement to submit your data to GLIMS, both for extinct glaciers and all other data you might have. Then the final talk of this seminar is our chief editor of Annals and Journal of Glaciology, Hester Giscott, that has helped us set up this collection of vanishing glaciers, and she will talk about tips for writing papers. So I think that can be useful for many of us. So welcome, Hester.
So thanks, Liz. Next slide, please. before I start to talk about the journal and the annals, I want to point out a glacier that is actually not in any of the databases, but that has had some research in the 1980s and 1990s. It even had a name. It's a glacier in the Kananaskis in a region. You can see like the bottom right, there were some kind of remnant glaciers there mapped, but they've never made it into any glacier database. And the largest one of those is Ray Glacier. So Dan Smith in the 80s and 90s with like some collaboration did quite a bit of research on this glacier. And then in 1991, it was 700 meters long, and they did radio echo sounding, they did glacier velocity measurements, and right now it really is like almost gone. So I would actually nominate that, and I'm going to look into that. It's also for me to drive. This is the closest glacier. I'm pretty close to Calgary. So it's a shame to see this disappear. They projected disappear within the next 35 years in 1994. So that is like kind of right now or in the next 5 years. So next slide, please. So first, I want to give a little bit of an overview. The Journal of Glaciology and the Annals of Glaciology are the two scientific journals that are published by the IGS. The journal is one of the oldest glaciological journals in the world, at least in the English-speaking world, published since 1947, the Annals since 1980. The journal is constantly open for all sorts of like submissions, and glaciology includes sea ice, everything like snow and ice related, not just glaciers and ice sheets. The Annals is a thematic journal where this particular Annals issue, which is now called collection, is called Vanishing Glaciers, and it's only open for submissions, for new submissions until the 1st of June. And Liz already explained for much of this. So this particular issue is not related to an IGS symposium, and we've had like a number of other issues like this before. This finally, like since 2024, so since last year, we've had now only online issues of both journals, so no more print versions, and it's continuous publication. So there's actually only a volume number and no issue number anymore. So your paper, if it's accepted, it will immediately be incorporated into an online collection. Next slide. So I will give some tips on like what we expect from submissions, from manuscript submissions, and how to actually like write the best paper that you can write. So there's 3 types of papers that we have: articles, letters, and communications. Articles are full-blown proper scientific articles. In the past, we were like restricted to a number of pages. It's kind of unlimited, even though you have to make good use of space of the journal. And then letters are smaller submissions like that. It doesn't mean that they're scientifically less like quality. They also have an abstract. They're actually like listed in the Web of Science and everything, but they're just like shorter. And then communications are like other types of small ones. So what we're looking for this particular annals is mostly letters, and there's like a number of articles. So each small glacier may only like have a letter for it. Next one. So what do you need for submission? What do we accept? It needs to be, first of all, of high scientific quality. It needs to be complete and clear, and that means both the research needs to be complete and the presentation needs to be complete and clear, no gaps there. It doesn't need to be novel. We're not like one of the kind of big journals that we need like a big step forward in science. We publish those types of papers too, but like any small step in terms of decreasing the gap in knowledge will actually be of high scientific quality, will be good. It needs to be substantially different from previous work, no duplication there, and submitted in English, and you can choose which spelling as long as you're consistent throughout. Now, this is in our author instructions, so this is the main kind of thing that we're looking for both journal and the annals. Next one. How to write an effective paper? Well, first of all, you have to have something to say, and then you have to know how to say it. So next slide. there's three components there. There's the purpose and the content, and that is like you have something to say. So you need to really know what the scientific message is or how you close the knowledge gap with your submission. You also really need to be clear about what you need to say. Do you need primary field data or like satellite data, or do you need model data? Do you need particular methods, some ideas? Who do you need as like co-authors to actually like make that complete and clear? Second part is the presentation, and with the presentation, it's partly you're writing in combination with the figures. You have to guide the reader. You have to communicate clearly and effectively both through the text and through the figures. And to do that, you need to both kind of think about how to do that with the content and structure. So the content is really what are you reporting? You have to be selective in that. It shouldn't be the same as like a graduate thesis. With structure, you need to like really figure out where it goes in the manuscripts. Next slide. So where it goes in the manuscript, some of you may remember kind of the acronym IMRAD, with Intro, Methods, Results, and Discussion. Nowadays, we have a lot more components. And what you should be really be careful with is that you don't do repetition between the components, or do not kind of make the conclusions kind of really similar to the abstract. They each have like a particular purpose, and they each need to like be complete and clear as their own paragraphs and their own sections, not too much repetition. And within sentences, you also need to think about the sentence structure. Now, for us, like just a little tip, data, like right now, we want you to also give, like all the primary data need to be either like on a data repository. You provide us with that link, which should be a permanent DOI link. And supplementary material you can provide, and we will actually store that on the CUP site that is linked to the DOI of your paper. Next. So there's 6 rules that I generally have for writing effective papers. Focus on one main result. Make clear what is good or unique about your work right from the get-go, from the intro onwards. Everything needs to be of high scientific quality. That means both the approach, the data that you use, the methods that you use, the analysis that you've done, and the inferences that you make throughout in terms of the writing and in terms of like the communication. Then communicate clearly and effectively, as I already said, guide the reader. And that means explain and inform. It's your task to make the reader do that, understand your work. Structure, make each component self-contained, tables and the figures, be selective in terms of figures. Be consistent, but the 6th rule is the most important one. Know the rules so that you can break them effectively. So number 1, you don't have to focus on one main result, but you have to kind of know why you're breaking this rule. Next one. So this is my final slide. So when you really want to learn about writing scientific papers, you first of all read journals, authors, instructions, and style guides. And I've put the link for the Annals here. Read other papers critically for content, like within your research group, discuss those, summarize papers, criticize papers, read about writing, but clearly you have to write and let other people read your writing and like give them the freedom to edit your work. And then I've given them a number of links to like very short papers or like longer books that like guide you through the writing of these scientific papers. So thank you, that was it.
Thank you so much, Hester. And that was the final talk. Maybe we can add some of the links to the chat while we take questions. So just to sum up, if you want to add to this Annals collection, submit your papers by 1st of June. If you have a question, you can send an email to Tolly or me or even Hester. You find information on the IGS site. Just search for Annals of Glaciology Journal Instructions. Next Tuesday, 21st January, will be the launch day of International Year of Glacier Preservation. So I thank you all for the attention. Thank my co-presenters. And if you have questions to the speakers, we can take some questions and answers now. And Dominic has had to leave us, but he says if you have questions to him, you can either ask Rafnir or we can send him an email and he will respond quickly. Thank you.
So are there any questions from the audience? Like if you have some, just speak up or write them into the chat.
There's one question in the chat. When will the last glacier in Iceland vanish?
Yeah, that's for you.
That's from me. So according to the different modeling studies, it's estimated that we will have some remains of Hofsjökull in 150 or 200 years. So depending on the different scenarios, this will take between 150 and 200 years approximately.
Yeah, so you have more ice remaining.
Yeah.
Okay, are there more questions?
So Tolly and I already received some emails about whether some paper topics would be appropriate. So I think we already had 3 or 4 emails about that. So you can just continue to send emails if you have that, and we will answer. John?
Thank you all for these nice introductions to the different themes. I would have a short question to Bruce regarding this list of glaciers. Do you already have some, let's say, automated support to get the list? So, for example, when I do glacier inventories for 2 points in time, and I see when comparing them, say 1,000 glaciers have disappeared. And I will certainly not be able to go through the GLIMS IDs and extract them one by one. So what's your suggestion to get the list complete in the list format as you have presented?
Right. At the moment, you would have to download data and then look at the glacier status attribute in the attribute file of what you downloaded. But it is on my to-do list to be able to just download glaciers that are marked as vanished. So that doesn't exist yet, but it's on my to-do list. But when you download data, you can see for any particular glacier via that attribute whether it's gone or not.
Okay.
So you could filter on that automatically, like in ArcGIS or whatever.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yeah.
So there is a question from Susanne about, is there a place where there are reliable estimates of when specific glaciers will disappear? To my knowledge, there is not, but there are model estimates, for instance, Rans and others, Hus and Hock and so on. So there are data sheets for different kind of scenarios, but how much they are accessible, and I don't know of a special website where this is. Maybe some others have information about that. But that's useful, and I often get that question from journalists and others.
I can maybe add to that. So I think that Matthias Hus and Fabian and others are, there is a plan to at least do some model runs for the glaciers that are on the website. And so that will be hopefully available there at least.
Mm. So, yeah, I don't think I see some other questions yet. There are some comments. Thanks for the comments.
Yeah, so I guess if there are no more questions, otherwise address them to the speakers also per mail. And yeah, I also want to thank a lot to all the speakers of today's seminar for a great start into the International Year of Glacier Preservation. And finally, I would like to advertise for the next talk in 2 weeks, which is by Dr. Andreassen from Amrita University, and it is about climate change and associated geohazards in the Himalayan cryosphere system. So yeah, I hope to also welcome as many audience members as today, and thank you a lot to everybody for attending and for the speakers again.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Goodbye.
Thank you.
Bye.